The WTO is an international organization that deals with the rules for trade between countries. It serves three primary functions. First, it provides a forum for countries to liberalize trade and establish new rules. Second, it monitors and administers these rules. And finally, the WTO also helps members to settle their disputes. The WTO currently has 164 members, representing about 98% of global trade. Now, with trade tensions increasingly politicized, it's important to have an international organization that helps members settle their disputes. And finally, the COVID-19 pandemic has led to an unprecedented collapse in global trade. And having a well-functioning and modernized World Trade Organization can help to boost the economic recovery. Even before the global pandemic, all three functions of the WTO were under pressure. For instance, WTO members failed to bring the most recent round of multilateral trade negotiations, the so-called Doha round, to a successful conclusion. And in December 2019, the WTO appellate body, which is the highest tribunal in the WTO's dispute settlement system, became non-operational. This is because the United States blocked the appointment process, and the appellate body thus lost the necessary quorum of 3 members to hear any appeals. President Trump has been a very vocal critic of the WTO, even threatening to pull the United States out of the organization. But it's important to realize that concerns about the WTO did not start with the Trump administration. In fact, President Obama was the first one to start the process of blocking the appointment and reappointments of WTO appellate body members. And secondly, it's also important to realize that many of the concerns that the US has raised are actually shared by many WTO members. Few, however, would support the tactics that are employed by the current administration in the United States. Reform of the WTO has to really happen across all 3 of its functions because they are interconnected. So the dispute settlement crisis is closely linked to the breakdown in the negotiation function of the WTO. The global trade landscape has changed quite significantly over the last 25 years, but the WTO rules have not kept pace. So going forward, it's really important for WTO members to establish new rules in areas such as e-commerce or digital trade. The WTO is also not fit for purpose to deal with the challenges that China's economic system and China's trade policies and practices represent. And finally, there needs to be an increased alignment between the trade rules and rules that support sustainability and address important challenges of the 21st century, such as climate change. So again, the entire reform package of WTO reform needs to happen across all 3 of its functions.